everyone. Welcome back to God Loves Gays, a history of Christian thought on sex and gender. A little late today. Today was my niece's first official day of summer, so I was kidnapped into summer hangouts with Bob. You say hi, Bob? Say hi, Bob. Hello. I put you back down. Today we're going to talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jesus himself, and who he may have actually been, what we can really know about him, which, as you see from our first slide here, is very little. There's very little that we can historically know for sure was true about Mr. Jesus. Hello, Alexis, Miguel, Pablo, Queen of Madness, Daniel, Sagittarius, Lobsel, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to jump right into it and talk about who was Jesus, what did he believe, and then we're going to talk about some of the people who love Jesus. Some of the people that love him. Hello, Pop Rock, Sakatsky, welcome. So, to get started, when we're trying to describe or to learn about an ancient historical figure, well, what do? We look for references to the person, writings about the person, anything we can find archaeologically to reinforce the idea that this person was real. Sad truth about Jesus is we only have three non-gospel references to the man Jesus Christ. 3. And all 3 of them, which book was it? I didn't write down which book it was. Are references that are teeny tiny. I think, was it Ehrman? It might have been Ehrman again. It was Ehrman. I think I marked it. I'm smart. I marked it. One of them was a man named Tacitus. He was a Roman historian. He mentions the fire that was set by Nero and that the emperor blamed the Christians. He says, that Christians get their name from Christus, who was executed at the hands of the procurator Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius. So that's the first one. Another one is from a very famous historian, Pliny the Younger, another Roman, who mentions that a group of people were calling themselves Christians and were meeting illegally in his territory, that they gathered together to worship Christ as a god, and he asked the emperor what he should do about them. The third is a Jewish historian named Josephus, who mentions, in a very long paragraph, at this time there appeared a man, Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of people who receiveth the truth with pleasure. And he gained a following, both among many Jews and among many of Greek origin. And when Pilate, because of an accusation made by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who had loved him previously did not cease to do so. And until this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him has not died out. That's everything historically we have about the man. Everything. We say historically because the Gospels are not really a document that is what you want when you want to try and discuss someone as a historical figure, because they're written with an agenda. They're written by people who have something to say about Jesus. Whereas the Roman stuff, the Jewish stuff, they're historians who are writing about someone that they don't worship. So there's a little more objectivity there. Unfortunately, the Gospels aren't that, but we can still kind of work with what we have to work out some of what must be true about the man Jesus. For instance, he was definitely poor, grew up in rural areas, and was Jewish. Oh my goodness, Pablo, thank you so much. Sorry to wait so long. Aw. I hope you've been doing well. I know things have been busy, and you've mentioned some in the Discord of your troubles with work, but I hope things have gotten better, and thanks for joining us, and thank you for your support. So yes, he was poor, rural, Jewish. He was probably born in Nazareth. There's these stories, obviously, we all talk about the stories of Bethlehem. He's Jesus of Nazareth because that's where he was from. And he's probably changed to being born from Bethlehem because that town has something to do with David. There's some mythological reasons for why they would want to tell the story that he was from Bethlehem, which both Matthew and Luke do. We can go into that another day. But otherwise, he probably was born, raised, grew up in Nazareth, which we assume that's true because where there's a reason to lie about Bethlehem because of this historical, mythological story of a Messiah of David's line coming from his birthplace, Nazareth is basically bumfuck nowhere in terms of, historic, so it makes sense that that's actually where he'd be from. He had a mother and a father, Joseph and Mary, presumably, and he had many brothers and sisters, according to Mark, who mentions them. Those are going to be called cousins by the Catholics, because they don't, Mary is a pure, total, eternal virgin in Catholic tradition, so they call those his cousins, but Mark calls them his brothers and sisters. He was probably baptized by John the Baptist, and that's likely when his missionary started, because Mark starts that way, and Mark's the earliest one, and it makes sense timeline-wise, and it's also something that his people would probably not lie about, because again, it's kind of hard theologically to explain why the Messiah would be baptized by someone else. So that probably happened. He probably learned a lot from John, because they have a lot in common with the way that they teach and the way that they preach and all this. Jesus is what we would call an apocalyptic Jewish preacher. And there were a lot of them at the time, basically preaching the end is coming, get right with Christ, get good with God, live well because the end times are coming. He was that kind of teacher. He did probably have 12 followers that he chose as his inner circle. The number 12 would have been special because there were 12 tribes of Israel, and he was saying, we're going to start a new kingdom of God on earth. This is the new 12 tribes, that kind of thing. He likely did associate with all the poor, unaccepted members of society, the people that tradition says, you shouldn't be around because either they are unclean or they're immoral. He hung out with criminals and prostitutes and the sick, lepers, because that's also something else that you wouldn't really lie about. That's not something that comes off as at this period in history impressive. It's not really. In fact, it's something that was used to insult them for decades, the fact that they were all poor, uneducated, dirty, sick kind of people. He was arrested. he was most likely betrayed, and then he was executed by Pontius Pilate. We say that the betrayal probably did happen because, again, why would people who like him lie about that? It makes him look weak. It makes him look like, one of his own betrayed him. That's something that could be used against him. So it's probably true that one of his own circle did turn on him and turn him into the temple. Now, what did they turn him in on is an interesting question, because people knew who he was. They knew he was a preacher. It's not like they didn't know his face. So what did Judas exactly do? Bart Ehrman has a really fascinating theory as to what he actually did, which is basically that Jesus had secret teachings that he told to his followers only, things about how, I am the Son of God, or not necessarily I'm Son of God, but that when God's kingdom comes, we will all be kings on earth, what have you. Some of his more poetic, royal-sounding messages could have been construed as being anti-Roman, and that it's possible Judas went to the temples and told some of these more anti-Roman sounding things that he didn't say in public, and that's what got him arrested. We're not there's a lot of guessing, because there wouldn't have been any of his followers in that courtroom. It would have been the high-level Jewish priests, it would have been Romans. We don't know what exactly happened there. But that was one interesting theory as to why Judas actually was betraying Jesus, and it kind of makes sense, honestly. That's really all we know about the man Jesus. Did he have a last name? Not that we know of. Last names really weren't a thing back then, especially if you were poor. That wasn't really anything that people had. I do not know where Nazareth is. Modern day Palestine. Is Palestine somewhere? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. So that is what we know, which is very, very little, considering how important and influential he is the world over. But really, what's more important about the man? What we know about him, or what he teaches? And that is really what makes him so interesting and so different. Let's talk about the 4 Gospels that actually teach us about the man Jesus. This is very small. I'm going to make this bigger so that we can all read it a little better. Oh man. Okay. I'm going to put it like that. Hello. Here, we'll start with, we'll make this like this. There we go. So, there's 4 Gospels. They are not the same, and they are not written with the same intentions. They aren't written at the same time. The people writing them don't know about each other, really. They aren't writing them in tandem. So they often have a different view of who Jesus is, why he teaches, what his purpose is on earth. So let's talk about them in order. Mark being the first, which we've talked about. We don't actually know who wrote any of these. The names associated with them are probably given to them to give them some credence, like we talked about yesterday or the day before, that a person associated with Jesus would often be given the authorship of a text to give it value, to give it some validation. So probably wasn't written by a man named Mark, who was I believe, a follower of Paul's. Does it say? I don't remember. He was associated with the group. Mark's point was he was writing to a group of persecuted people, surviving this terrible war, either during or just after this terrible war that had so overthrown everyone's lives. Everybody was suffering, everybody was dying. It was a really difficult time just to be Jewish or Christian at this point. And he is writing a story that's focused on Jesus as a man who lived and died and suffered under Roman tyranny, and to a certain extent, Jewish temple tyranny. The powers that be tortured and killed him, but he still wins, because there's a more ultimate battle going on. He wants to portray Jesus as being part of a greater battle that is still ongoing. He didn't lose. He's fighting against, powers in the afterlife, and we can take inspiration from him to get through these terrible, difficult times, and to suffer with the kind of grace that he did is kind of what Mark is going for. Mark's story doesn't cover the birth. It doesn't cover some of the more famous miracles. It's basically from the moment of the baptism with John, some of his wanderings and some of his teachings, some major ones, the arrest and execution, and then the added ending that involves him coming back. Christ was his last name? No, Christ was a title. So, he was called the Messiah, and Messiah is a Jewish term that has a lot of history in the Old Testament. There is a coming Messiah that is mentioned in the Old Testament a lot, that the Christians wanted to associate Jesus with that Messiah. They wanted to say, this is who we think that Messiah is. In Greek, Messiah was translated to Christos. So Jesus Christos, Jesus Christ, is Jesus the Messiah. So it's not his last name, it's his title, it's what he was called by the Greeks. And it just became Christ over years of centuries of, telephone. Alright, so Matthew is the next one. He's probably the most popular, nope, wrong way. He's the most popular of the Gospels, and for good reason. He takes all the best of Mark, makes it a little more storied, gives it the virgin birth. It starts with the beginning of his life, adds a lot of the prophecies. He's the Jewish Bible, the Jewish Gospel is what he's usually referred to, because he adds a lot of references to the Old Testament. He adds a lot of discussion of Jewish law. He sees Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, and theories go that he was probably writing more to a Jewish audience, trying to convince people to convert, Here it says, trying to teach a community that has internal divisions, written 15 years after the war, so things aren't as grim anymore. It's also not, he's over in more probably central Roman Empire area rather than in Palestine. Mark also wasn't in Palestine. We know that from basically none of the Gospels were written from there that we can tell. But it's definitely, if I were to tell you to read any of them, I'd say Matthew. I think it's the best one as far as style, meaning, it has a lot going for it. It still doesn't have everything we consider part of Jesus' story. Even in terms of the story of his birth, Matthew and Luke both have pieces of it. I think Luke has the shepherds and Matthew has the 3 wise men. They don't both have both of those pieces. The Christmas story that we Christians have all heard growing up is a fusion of Luke and Matthew. They also both have different ideas of why the birth happened in Bethlehem and why the birth was foretold, why it was... There's different reasons. I mix them up sometimes. Luke is a little less... it's a little harsher, I think, at times to read. If I remember right, it's the one that's considered the most anti-Jewish. Let's scroll over and see what it says. My face is gone! Oh no! Hello. Let's see. Oh no, it says it's the most... Okay, so... Oh, no, I am looking at the wrong one. It says writing to Gentile Christians, which basically means non-Jews. He was a convert. He was an educated historian. He definitely referenced Mark the same way Matthew did. And his is more focused on challenging, the people that he is writing to. I'm going to move this over. There we go. John, fascinating. John is really unlike the other 3. The other 3 are called the Synoptic Gospels because they kind of follow the same formula. They are chronological, they have a message to say about Jesus' life, and they're about the human Jesus. John is not that. John is about Jesus as God, which is normal to us to think about, but not back then. Jesus was a prophet. He was preaching about God. He was calling, saying that someone would come down, the Son of God would come down, and the end times would come. He was not associating himself with that term. And when he spoke about God the Father, that was a way that a lot of Jewish preachers would talk about God. It wasn't just, it was, in Jewish tradition, God is the Father of Israel, of the Jewish people. So until John's Gospel, the idea that Jesus himself was divine was not really universal. Not every group of Christians believed it, but once John was included in the canon, that became normal. And John's Gospel's not chronological. It kind of jumps around different things, but some of the most famous stories are in John's Gospel. The water into wine. Why are you calling me? I am busy. Water into wine, Lazarus. You know, some of his most famous stories are only in John. It's very weird. Kind of reads like somebody was very high in a cave when he was writing it, but it's fascinating. And it describes more Jesus as something beyond human, whereas the other stories are far more about a human Jesus. All of them together have very different reasons for being written, very different ideas of what's important, but together, you know, considering each on their own as part of a continuum is what gives you what we get is modern Christianity today. You know, you can't really fuse them all together and write a fifth gospel without changing what they are. You kind of have to consider each book as its own story, and each one shows a different version of Jesus. Jesus as a divine figure, Jesus as a suffering human being, Jesus as teacher and healer, different versions of Jesus. Unfortunately, it looks like I think my dog needs walked. It's been storming all day, so she has not been able to go out all that easily. So I will try and be very quick. I will be right back. It's so wet. I took my dog out and she didn't even pee. She hates rain. Hates it. Alright, let me scroll that back down. And we're back. Is it that easy with Christians? I'm slightly confused. What was the question? I myself see someone as Jesus, someone who talked about himself as God. When you look at the original language, it's not the case in every gospel. I think it's been often translated to mirror that. I think later versions definitely took John's idea there. But if you look at earlier, like, more faithful to the original Greek, possibly, certain gospels, especially, like, Mark, don't really go that far. Especially because their point is emphasizing his humanity as a way of giving his followers someone to empathize with and feel seen by. It varies. Depends also on what Bible you're looking at. Whew. Forgive me, we've been running around wild all day. So, we were talking about what he preached. Talked about the Gospels. Let's see, I had another image here about Gospels. Oh yeah, here we go. Well, I'm going to put, this is going to go big for real quick, because this is neat. This is kind of an overview of, basically, the books. How does it portray Jesus? preacher, man of power, master teacher, or a person. I disagree with that. I don't know about that. Written to, who the audience mainly is, what is the main feature of the story, the arrangement, the amount that's spoken by Christ, the amount of quotations, allusions. See, that's the part I liked, is the quotations bit. What the focus was. I think that's pretty neat. Yeah, I don't know about the beginning here. Like, John, I don't think person is the focus of John. I don't think you get that. I disagree. Anyway, I like the bottom bit, so that's why I introduced it. So, what did he teach? We're going to read 2 sections here, talk about the overview. One main thing we talked about is money and greed. He does not like rich people. One quote, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth. You want to have treasures in heaven. He tells this rich man who asks him what he can do to follow God and says, give everything away. The rich guy says he's not going to do that. And that's when Jesus says the thing about the eye of the needle. You know, easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. He condemns temple corruption. He condemns, various things that have to do with money and power. Even beyond just outright what he says, there's a lot of context that shows he values poor people and does not like people that hoard money. On that note, charity is one of the greatest things in his tradition, where he's constantly giving things away himself. He's telling people to give things away. He's telling people to help people. And he loves everyone. He's seen, and it's even commented on in many passages, where he sits with people that are undesired, criminals, sinners, the disabled, the blind, the poor, the hungry, lepers, prostitutes, laborers, people that weren't respected in society. He put himself with them. And he says at one point, someone comments on that, one of the priests, I think, and he says, a doctor comes to heal the sick. He's not going to hang out with the healthy people. Why would I go and hang out with the priests? These are the people that need me. He condemns same-sex marriage too. He does not. He does not. We've talked a lot about various things in the Bible that don't match up with that worldview in previous episodes, but also specifically Jesus says nothing about same-sex marriage. For one, he barely says anything about marriage. His one line we discuss, the divorce story, has less to do with divorce and more to do with politics at the time. But anyway. Law must serve man, not rule him, in the sense that often people will try to catch him up in unanswerable quandaries, basically, where he comes across and says, it's more important to follow the spirit of the law than the letter. He often will break rules because it is more important to help people. There's one story where he heals someone who had like a bad back or something on a Sunday. Like he's teaching in the synagogue and he sees someone who's injured walk in the synagogue and he heals him because he's hurting. And the priests go, "You're not allowed to do that. It's Sunday. It's not proper to work on Sunday." And he says, "The guy's sick. He's been sick for so long. Would it really be fair for me to wait like 12 more hours when I could help him right now?" It's more important to follow the spirit rather than the specific word of the book. Am I a Christian? Yes, I am. I was raised Protestant, vaguely. My dad was Baptist and did not enjoy it. And he never really found a church that became his church. My mom was Methodist, but, we never really went to church every weekend. We went to church like once a month, trying to find one that my dad liked, and my dad just never liked one. Chosen family, in the sense that this is really revolutionary for his time period more so than ours. It was completely valid in his view to step away from people that were not jiving with your viewpoint, basically. If your family doesn't, agree with you being Christian or following God in your way, if your government, if your state, your city, your family is us. Your family is with Christ. He specifically says something like that when I think someone says, "Hey, your family's outside, Jesus. They want to talk to you." And Jesus goes, "My family's right here, right at this table. These are my bros," which again, think about back then, how important your loyalty to your family unit and your government and your state and what have you. It was so intricate to society, even as it is today, but the idea of walking away from that was far more revolutionary in his time than it is in ours. So I have two stories I want to talk about that I just think are really lovely versions, views of Jesus. I think they are interesting, and they say something about him that is intriguing. It is a lot less straightforward, I think, than most of the, like, stories most people know. Like, obviously, we know he gave out food, not once but twice. The bread, making bread for people, he does that twice. He heals people constantly. He talks to people that other people would not see as valuable or as healthy, because they're lepers or what have you. So it's stories about Jesus that on the surface might be a little hard to explain, so they aren't as popular, I think. Well, one of them I think people know about. This one you may not know about, but I love it. From Mark 5:21, a girl restored to life and a woman healed. So follow along. This is a story with two stories in it. A story within a story. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather got worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So what's happening in this story? Jesus arrives in a new place. People have heard of him, so they're eager to see him, to be healed by him, to talk to him. He already has a pretty big reputation as a healer and a preacher. As soon as he arrives, a very rich man in the city, the head priest of the temple there, or synagogue there, comes forward, Jairus, and he says, "My daughter's very sick, she's dying, please come heal her." And Jesus agrees. But as they're going, a vagabond, a woman that has been ill for so long, it's destroyed her life. It doesn't mention that she has any family members or a husband, no family taking care of her. She has no more money because she spent it all on healing that didn't work. And she's hemorrhaging, which we don't really know exactly what that meant, but there's a theory that probably she had some kind of disease related to the uterus where she wouldn't stop bleeding. She is so ill that it's ruined her life. And she hears Jesus has come, but she doesn't go to Jesus to beg for help the way that the rich man did, because she is on the fringes of society in every sense, and she doesn't take the moment to go forward and try to heal herself rather than to ask for it, because she doesn't feel like she's worth asking. In my view, it feels like she doesn't feel like she can go forward and ask because that's not her place. She is, ill, poor, not supposed to do that. But she thinks, just the chance, the hope, if I can just touch his clothes. And it works because she believed and she had faith. Well, Jesus feels this and he stops. And everybody's like, well, what are you doing? We're going to go help the girl, the daughter of the rich man? And he won't move. He wants to know what happened. He wants to check on, the woman. He wants to make sure that it is okay, that the woman is okay. He wants to figure out what just happened. And the woman is, terrified now that she's done something wrong, and tells him, takes the time to tell her story, which no one's, clearly living in the streets, having nowhere to go, no one's heard her story. And Jesus takes the time to stop and hear her story. And then, daughter. He calls her daughter. He claims this woman, sick, without family, no one to care for her. He claims her as family. Which in the old world, saying something like that, that's like saying, you're under my protection now. You are my daughter. Go be well. He validates what she did. The only time in the Bible that someone heals themselves of their own accord, uses Jesus' power without his permission. Joel, I will have to ask you to please stop preaching in the chat. It is my job. Everybody has their own thing. This is all about learning, not about trying to convert people. That is not what this is about. You have been warned. It's fascinating. He validates what she did. Validates it, appreciates her, heals, changes her life. She is healed now. And in the midst of that happening, the daughter dies. The daughter is gone. The rich man who he made wait for him so he could take care of a sick, poor woman. Bottom of society. A woman, she's poor, she's so ill, she's bleeding everywhere. Bottom of society. And he puts aside the rich man for it. But he doesn't abandon him. He makes him wait. But even after the daughter dies, he says, I can heal her. I can, he still goes to help the rich family. And he does the amazing, unbelievable thing of raising this woman, of this child, bringing her back to life. And there's this very fascinating book called Back to the Well that talks about Jesus' interactions with women in the Bible, that discusses how, in many ways, this story mirrors his own challenges that come later, where he will be suffering and ill, and he will die, and he will come back. That both of these women are, in essence, embodying the suffering he will soon go through, which I think is fascinating. It shows a very lovely version of Jesus. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. If he does not power down again, then just boot him. Anyway. Yeah, that was that story. The story of Jesus and the two sick women, which I think is fascinating. There's so many levels there. That there's the aspect of gender where he takes the time to deal with a very sick woman. There's aspects of money where he puts the poor woman's problem above the rich man's. But he also still helps everybody. It's just very, very fascinating. I love it. I love it so much. Next story is also one that deals in some ways with issues of gender. This is one we mentioned the other day when we talked about oral traditions. The woman caught in adultery, which is a story that was probably a oral tradition that was added to the book of John. And we can tell for various reasons. There's parts of the story that don't seem to be present, things that maybe got lost or were, as this was an oral story that was told over time, maybe the person that wrote this down didn't have the whole story. We'll talk about it. But I think it's fascinating. Each of them went home while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say? They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on do not sin again." So what's happening here? One, the leaders of the temple, again, the Jewish leaders are the bad guy in John, in much of the Gospels, because we talked about all the politics of the time. They are bringing forth this woman in order to try and trap Jesus into saying something controversial. They're trying to cancel Jesus. They are trying to cancel Jesus. So they bring this woman and say, "We caught her in adultery. What do you say?" The first problem is that to commit adultery, you have to have two people, and the dude is not present. So that immediately raises red flags of, okay, something's happening here. You know, did they pay this woman or did they just grab a woman off the street to try and catch him? Like, what really is up with this woman? There's some theories that maybe it was some kind of Roman who was the male involved, which means that they wouldn't have any power over that figure, but I feel like maybe that would have been said. Either this is something, it feels like there's something there that possibly was lost in the oral tradition. Again, it says that Jesus starts writing on the ground. This is the only time in the Bible that writing is mentioned, as far Jesus writing. And again, Jesus would have been a poor Jew. He would have spoken Aramaic. He probably would not have been taught to write. He would not have been taught to read or write Hebrew, because that's like only the teachers in the temples learn that. So it's interesting that he writes, but we're not taught what he wrote. Just that he is writing in the dirt. We don't know. He writes twice. And then he says, you know, the very famous, throw the first stone if you're sinful. Which is, in the one hand, it's a lovely line. But if they had decided to lie to themselves and say, "Ha, I'm innocent," they could have started throwing. Then what would he have done? He took a kind of risk there. But I think it was a calculated risk where he knew that this was up, that they were trying to catch him, that this woman, maybe there's more going on there, and he took the risk to make a point. And the point was, how can you condemn somebody else when you've got your own stuff to deal with? Which is a major belief of a lot of Gnostic Christians at the time, the idea that we can't, you know, society and the church cannot condemn us for our sins. We have to deal with our own sins. We have to handle our own problems and overcome them ourselves. Nobody can do it for us. And that's kind of what Jesus is saying here. And he takes the time, after everybody starts leaving one by one, feeling kind of made uncomfortable by what he said, to talk to the woman and say, "Hey, who condemned you?" Meaning the witness. In terms of like sexual crimes, up until recently, you had to have witnesses to say that this kind of crime happened. And there is no witness. She says it. Nobody condemned me. So we don't have a witness. We don't have another partner. It's feeling very much like this was made up. And so he says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go away. Do not sin again." But what sin? Do not sin again. I think, honestly, it's the sin of trying to catch him up in this lie. It sounds like she was involved in some way. I think if he had said anything, said, "Stone her," I think immediately these priests would have turned around and said, "This innocent woman was just condemned by this man for no reason. He would stone her." I think that's really what they were trying to do. That the moment that he said something that would have been based on their lies, they could have turned it and made it sound like, you know, he did not do enough to figure out what happened. He condemned someone without any proof. And he knew it. And he forgave her for trying to catch him in this lie. Just fascinating stuff. And of course, the throw the first stone, what a famous line, you know, just lovely stuff. I really adore it. We are now going to change, we're going to change directions. And I'm going to warn anyone that's devout, there's going to be some blasphemy There's gonna be some difficult topics of conversation coming. Talk about Jesus and sex. Specifically, we're going to talk about one thing we haven't mentioned yet, the beloved disciple, and then we're going to talk about how people have defined their relationship with Jesus over time. We'll get to that. But first, let's talk about the beloved disciple. The beloved disciple is a figure mentioned 6 times in the book of John. The book of John actually ends by saying this story has been based upon the words of the beloved disciple. That's who this story came from, which is kind of really the only one of the books that says something like that. All the other ones are kind of we don't really know who wrote them, and the texts themselves don't try to say. There's no moment in Mark where he says, "Ah, yes, and I am Mark, and that is who I am." They don't do that. Only John ends with this moment that says, this is based on the stories shared by the beloved disciple. And it also makes it sound like maybe it's being dictated to, oh, bye, Jessica, thanks for joining us. It sounds like maybe it's being dictated to someone, and the scribe is writing down what the guy has said, which is interesting. The beloved disciple, only mentioned in John, is a figure mentioned in 6 various scenes. He is the disciple Jesus loved, the disciple whom Jesus loved, or the disciple beloved of Jesus is the translation that's often used. Agapeo is the Greek. There's this theory that this may have been Jesus's lover, because he was a man and he was a human. He ate, he slept, he probably loved. And I mean, he was 30 before he started preaching, and he may have had lovers, and he may have had a lover who followed him. There are a few theories as to who this is. One theory that I don't catch on much with, but that people the one you've probably heard is Mary Magdalene, which I think that there's some traditions that people like that idea. I don't think that that's really viable for as far as maybe he loved her, but as far as being the beloved disciple, I don't think that's true, because the beloved disciple is referred to with male pronouns. He is a man who was there at the Last Supper. Specifically, he leaned, let me see if I can find the Greek for this, Greek Testament here. Where did I put the end of John? Where is John? Hi, John. How are you? Where is... This was then... Where was the last... Okay, that's Pilate, so that's too far. That's too far. John's version of the Last Supper is very different. And at one point, when he mentions someone's going to betray him, at the Last Supper, it says, the beloved disciple asked, who will betray you? Jesus doesn't answer, I don't think. Okay, that's when Jesus is betraying. I can't find it, but he leans on him. It's often portrayed in paintings, which I think I have a painting. Yeah! As having laid his head in Jesus' lap. And that's when, who will be, they're eating dinner, they're relaxing. In this era, you would have been sitting on the floor, and he leans on him, and he asks him, who possibly could betray you, Another thing that he does, is when Jesus is actually on the cross, he sees the beloved disciple and his mother, Mary, and he says, Mary, this is your son, this is your mother, which he was entrusting his mother to one of the disciples because he was dying. And that's very important for back then. What does this all have to do with God Loves Gays? It's the general title for the series because of a joke that was made earlier, but it's about how Christianity and sexuality, varying sexualities intersect, which we're getting to. The theory is that this was a man that Jesus loved romantically. And then we're going to talk more about some other things that have to do with that. He entrusts his mother to this man, which intentionally basically means this is someone that he sees as family. Because back then you would have needed a person to take care of your mother. I mean, and even today you'd say something like, but legally, an older woman, if she didn't have her husband, which Joseph doesn't seem to be around, we don't know what really happened there, but I mean, that says a lot about how he sees this person. He's also mentioned as basically just kind of being in the scene when other disciples are around, but he's never named. And there's a lot of questions about why is he never named? Why is he not in the other books? My theory, as far as the other books go, if this is a book that was dictated by one of the actual disciples or someone that knew him, then it's possible that the other books, which were not dictated, but were versions, people writing down oral traditions, stories they heard second, third, fourth, fifth hand, they wouldn't have known about a beloved disciple. But someone who theoretically was connected to the disciples might have. Again, we don't know how true all that is. But I feel like, why would you make up a special disciple and not name them and not give them a major role? I mean, he doesn't do much. He's mentioned, specifically being spoken to, twice. He's just kind of there. We really don't know. Now, it is a story, the book ends with the beloved disciple is the one that told this story, but it doesn't really, I feel like if you were to do that, why not play it up? Why not name the disciple to give it even more weight to say, yes, this is the book of John, because, yes, this is that. Why be so vague? There's a lot of questions. One theory is maybe modesty. I think if this guy was so important to Jesus, you might want to keep that on the down low, given the political climate of the time, maybe. If it was a illicit relationship, you might want to keep that down low, because at this point, church fathers are against that. We don't know. Theories as to who it is. John is obviously the big one, because the book is named John. John was one of his followers. John the... what was his title? I can't even remember because I'm an idiot. He is the main choice usually. James is another, but James was Jesus's brother as far as tradition goes. Which brother was often a euphemism in the era for things, but Lazarus is one, because some lines in the book tend to say, one, Lazarus is only in John, and two, some of the lines seem to, Jesus basically saying he really cared for Lazarus. But we don't know. But there is a beloved disciple who was male who was so very loved by Jesus. I think that's interesting. And there are traditions in history for queer folks who are interpreting it in that light. Now let's get to the fun stuff. We've talked about who Jesus is, what he taught, and possibly who he was in love with. Let's talk about people who loved Jesus. This is going to cover a bunch of history. We're going to just talk about specific people writing about Jesus and the way that people have written about him. In cultures where sexuality is so heavily controlled and repressed, for people for whom free sexual expression is hard to get to, Jesus is the safest way to express your desires. When you cannot live a sexually fulfilling life, Jesus is the way to go, is kind of what happens. Okay, time for banning. Ban the man. I can't wait to go to hell. I can't wait to party down with the man. But except we won't, because, Jesus loves all of us, so we're going to be partying with Jesus. We'll go visit downtown on the weekends. It'll be fun, Anyway, let's talk about people that have loved Jesus. Rupert of Etux from 1129. He was a very small figure. I can't find any more references about him besides my textbook, but he had a dream where he worshipped the crucifix and Jesus returned his gaze. He rushed to the altar, embraced and kissed him. I held him. I embraced him. I kissed him for a long time. I sensed how seriously he accepted this gesture of love when, while kissing, he himself opened his mouth that I might kiss more deeply. Theoretically, this is the oldest reference of French kissing, and it is with Jesus in a dream. Now we have Angela of Feligno. To discuss Angela, let's mention a very big tradition in Christian thought from around the 1200s to most of medieval times. Mysticism, specifically female mysticism. In this era, we're going to talk another day about the convents and the monasteries and the evolution of Christianity in those, because it's very important in relation to sexuality. This was an era where the church realized that the monks and the nuns were having parties and getting down, especially with each other. And chop chop, we got to stop that. So control of those got really, really tough. So women stopped going to the convent. It used to be that's a cool place to hang, chill with my ladies, learn how to read. Now, because it's so controlled, it's better to be a mystic and strike out on your own. And a lot of these women would have ecstatic visions, they would have trances, they would prophesize, they would wander and preach the word of the Lord. Some of them would become what's called anchorites, which means basically they would live next to a church. The church would build them a tiny room and block them in and sustain them, and in return they would be, mystics. They would be reading and living the word of the Lord, just living for Jesus, locked in this little room. It was a big thing back then. We're going to talk about quite a few of them because nearly all of them saw Jesus as a very romantic and sexual being. They talk about Jesus even before this, way before this, the idea of Jesus as the husband of Christian women, major thing. Lots of women would talk about how they are saving themselves to be God's wife in heaven. John Chrysostom wrote about how in heaven there will be a bridal chamber for women that hold themselves for God, and that's something. Other traditions talk about Jesus as the husband of the church, that the church is the bride of Jesus. But let's talk about specific women who wrote about him. Angela of Feligno is a Italian woman. She had a vision of Francis of Assisi when she was 40 and realized her life was empty without God. She was married, she had many kids, she had a mother-in-law. She didn't like her life. Within 3 years, her entire family died, and she was thrilled. She writes in her diary that she was ecstatic about this, because now she was free to follow Jesus. Very happy about this. She gave away all her stuff. She starts wandering and living as a penitent, which basically means very ascetic lifestyle, thinking, worshiping only God. And her visions and ideas of Jesus are very interesting. She had visions of drinking his blood from the wound on his breast. Yeah, breastfeeding kink. Ancient breastfeeding kink. She strips herself naked at one point. She prays for death so that she can be with him. She has visions of kissing him on the mouth and on the breasts. She imagines herself in his grave with him. And in 2013, the Catholic Church made this woman a saint. Okay, let me see which part I wanted to read. I realized at this point that the experience was coming to an end, for he began to withdraw from me, and he did so very gently while telling me, "My daughter, you are sweeter to me than I am to you." And he repeated what he had already said, "My temple, my delight." At these words I realized that he did not want me to be lying down while he was leaving, so I stood up. He then said to me, "You are holding the ring of my love. From now on you are engaged to me, and you will never leave me. May the blessing of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and your companion." He said this at the moment of departure because I had asked him for a special grace for my companion. In response to this request, he simply said, "The grace I will give to your companion will be a different one from yours." I must add that when he said, "You shall never leave me again," my soul cried out, "Oh, that I may never sin mortally." To this, he said, "These are your words, not mine." These experiences and others were so powerful I cannot find words to describe them. I can say something about them, but my words are inadequate to transmit the sweetness and delight I experienced. Many more times did I hear God speak to me with words such as the above, but never at such length, nor with the same depth, or with such sweetness. I'm sorry, but Christianity is homophobic. You're not wrong that it's often used as a weapon against us. The way that I like to think of it is, if you like a work of fiction and all the fandom around it is garbage and full of assholes, I still love the work of fiction, but I hate the fandom. You know? I love the work of fiction. I hate the fandom. Anyway, that is Our Lady Angela of Feligno. Let's go on to Julian of Norwich. About a century later, another mystic in the Christian tradition. She was an anchorite, which meant she was, living in a small room off of a church. She received 16 visions while she was deathly ill, and she had a heavy focus on the idea of the God as a mother. She, in the ancient world, in the Gnostic tradition, we talked about some of them saw the Trinity as Mother, Father, Holy Son, really. Mother, Father, Son. She was one of the only ones at this period to come up with that same idea. That was not normal at this point. But for her, the third member of the Trinity was female. And one of her writings is called Revelations of Divine Love. When I was 30 years and a half, God sent me a bodily sickness, in which I lay 3 days and 3 nights. And on the 4th night I received all the rites of the Holy Church, and thought not to have lived till day. And I understood in my reason and the pains I felt I was going to die. Let me see, go down. At this time, suddenly I saw red blood running down from under the garland, looking at Christ hanging on the cross. Hot and fresh and plenteous and lifelike, just as it was in the time that the garland of thorns was pressed down on his blessed head. Even so I conceived truly that it was himself, God and man, the same that suffered for me, who showed it for me, without any intermediary. And the same showing, suddenly the Trinity filled full my heart with the utmost joy. For the Trinity is God, and God is the Trinity. The Trinity is our Maker. The Trinity is our Keeper. The Trinity is our everlasting lover. And then I saw that God rejoiceth that he is our Father, and God rejoiceth that he is our Mother, and God rejoiceth that he is our true spouse, and our soul his beloved wife. And Christ rejoiceth that he is our brother, and Jesus rejoiceth that he is our Savior. These are 5 high joys. And furthermore, I saw the second person, who is our mother substantially, the very same dear person who is now become our mother sensually. For of God's making we are double, that is to say, substantial and sensual. We could go on and on. She goes into a lot of detail exploring the idea of both God and Jesus as mother. Here, Jesus is our true mother in kind, of our first making, and our true mother in grace by his taking of our made kind. Goes on a long time like that. Just, woo! There's a lot of women that were in this tradition. Marjorie Kemp is a really famous one. Hildegard. There's quite a few. Those are just 2 of my favorites who are real overt about some of their more erotic, ecstatic imagery. But many of them took on the idea of Jesus as spouse, in part as a defense for the fact that they didn't want to get married, or they didn't want to, these were women taking control of their lives by pledging themselves to Jesus and to God in a relationship, in a romantic sense. One even used this as defense for a divorce, basically, to annul her relationship with her earthly husband so she could be with her heavenly husband. Now we're going to take a switch around here. 1500s. We're going to talk about some men. We're going to talk about John Donne, who I actually, thankfully, have the poetry of. John Donne is a very famous poet. He was a priest, a soldier, a lawyer, a cleric in the Church of England. He used a lot of poetic styles from Romantic poets to write his religious poetry. He's what's called a metaphysical poet. He spent a great deal of his life very, very poor. He wasted a lot of his money, spent his youth kind of wild and free, traveled across Europe, had a lot of sex, and he relied on some of his more rich friends to survive. Unfortunately, he then did end up getting married in a very secretive style. He basically got married to a woman without the family's permission, and it ruined him. Eventually, they reconciled, but his position at court was ruined. They went through a lot of money problems, and then in the next 12 years they had 14 pregnancies. She was always pregnant. They had 10 kids. At one point he was writing in his diary about how he, if the next child came stillborn, that would be one less mouth to feed, but he couldn't afford to pay for a funeral. That's how desperate they were with money and how many children they had. She ended up dying in childbirth after 10 children, and he was heartbroken. He really loved her. He did. He loved her quite a lot. But he also spent his youth loving some other folks. Specifically, a lot of his early poetry is incredibly gender-neutral. Romantic, gender-neutral poetry. Some of it less gender-neutral, like, here we go. The Blossom. I'm just going to read the last 2 lines of The Blossom. Or not 2 lines, 2 stanzas. Well then, stay here, but know, when thou hast stayed and done thy most, a naked thinking heart that makes no show is to a woman but a kind of ghost. How shall she know my heart, or having none, know thee for one? Practice may make her know some other part, but take my word, she doth not know a heart. Meet me at London, then, 20 days hence, and thou shalt see me fresher and more fat by being with men, than if I stayed still with her and thee. For God's sake, if you can, be you so too. I would give you there to another friend whom we shall find as glad to have my body as my mind. He basically just said, a woman can't ever really understand my heart, but a man can understand me and desire me. Some of his poetry is very, very vague in the terms of the genders that he refers to and the feelings he has about sex. Sex is very secretive to him. It's very much a temptation. It's dangerous, which at this era kind of could be. This is a little before, I think, or during James I. So the same era we were talking about with the writing of the King James Bible, where it was illegal on the books, but nobody really recognized it for what it was, and a lot of people went under the radar for that reason. So it's very likely that if he was in some way bisexual or homosexual, he would have had opportunities to meet like-minded people, but probably as a religious man would have struggled with that. And later poetry is going to be far more focused on Jesus. But his Jesus poetry is going to have some of his gayness on it. We're going to read 3 sonnets, one of which has, well, actually more, I think, than one, has very famous lines. You may recognize some lines. Where's the, I would not, let's see, death be not proud. I think I would not, I don't remember who it was. But some of his lines are very famous. Let's go ahead and read sonnets. As due by many titles I resign myself to thee, O God. First I was made by thee and for thee, and when I was decayed, thy blood brought that the which before was thine. I am thy son, made with thyself to shine, thy servant whose pains thou hast still repaid, thy sheep thine image until I betrayed myself a temple of thy spirit divine. Why doth the devil then usurp on me? Why doth he steal, nay, ravish? That's thy right. Except thou rise and for thine own work fight. Oh, I shall soon despair when I do see that thou lovest mankind well, yet wilt not choose me, and Satan hates me, yet is loath to lose me. Sounds like a man struggling with some things on the inside, and putting some of that onto paper, 1. 2, he says it's Jesus' right to ravish him, but the devil is ravishing him instead. You know, he steals me and ravishes me when it's your right. I am yours by right. Ravish me. You know, you can see where I think he's dealing with possibly some issues with his identity, his sexuality, possibly. I think there's interpretations that could be made there. But putting it in the terms of general morality and God, and putting it, and using some sexual language there. Here we go. This one has some anti-Semitic language, which was, you know, we've talked about how the politics led to, over time, the church really turning heavily on Judaism, and he says, he uses the historical, you know, spit in my face, you Jews, which is something that happens in the Bible. He's referencing that. Spit in my face, you Jews, and pierce my side, buffet and buffet and scoff, scourge and crucify me. For I have sinned, and only he who could do no iniquity hath died. But by my death cannot be satisfied my sins which pass the impiety. They killed once an inglorious man, but I crucify him daily, being now glorified. Oh, let me then his strange love still admire. Kings pardon, but he bore our punishment. And Jacob came clothed in vile harsh attire, but to supplant and with gainful intent God clothed himself in vile man's flesh, that so he might be weak enough to suffer woe. This is the last one, which one scholar referred to as a Trinitarian gangbang. Batter my heart, three-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand. Overthrow me and bend, your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I like a usurped town to another do, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend, but is captived, and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. Woo! Another poet of the era that we aren't going to talk about today because I didn't have time to prepare his stuff. Thomas Traherne writes about, in almost not even veiled language, about Jesus as his lover. Because he refers to himself, he says, Jesus, make me your Ganymede. And Ganymede is the god, the figure that Zeus steals and makes his cupbearer in heaven. He was a young man that Zeus loved and stole to be his lover. It kind of pulls on ancient traditions of bridal kidnapping, which is something that happened to men. There are traditions in ancient history where men would be kidnapped by other men for marriage. We'll talk about that another day. And Ganymede was known for that. And Thomas Traherne and a couple others used that language to kind of create rape fantasies with Jesus, where they wanted, you think about the rapture. The idea in the Bible in the end times where the good people will be basically teleported to heaven, they will be stolen away. They combine that imagery of the rapture with the imagery of Ganymede being taken by Zeus and put it together and have Jesus kidnap and ravish them, basically. One gets really explicit about it. I don't think I have it on the list today, but let's continue with our next dude, George Herbert. 1593 to 1633, actually lived in the time of King James and was part of his court. He went to college and caught the king's eye, became an orator at a college nearby, and he never married. After King James died, he became a priest, which means he never married. He met King James, and when King James died, he became celibate. The timing is interesting to me. I think that's it. He was part of his court, a court that was known for its homos, and his poetry is a kind of a little homo. So let's read some of his poetry. One of which I didn't find this one. He has a line in one of his poetry where he says, he writes about doubting Thomas, who's a figure from history, biblical history, one of the disciples who doubts the resurrection, and Jesus gives him his hand and lets him see that he has the holes in his hand, that he actually physically died and came back. And in one of this guy's, George Herbert's poems, he says, the servant puts his fingers in you. He put the man penetrates Jesus with his fingers. Yeah, it's a lot. He also has a poem where Jesus feeds someone with his breast, with the blood from his breast, the same that the other lady did. Has that same idea. So let's see where I put George Herbert's poems. George Herbert. Alright, where did I put George Herbert? Here he is. I think I have two. The Temper is the first one. This one's really lovely. How should I praise thee, Lord? How should my rhymes gladly engrave thy love in steel? If what my soul doth feel sometimes my soul might ever feel. Although there were some 40 heavens or more, sometimes I peer above them all. Sometimes I hardly reach a score, sometimes to hell I fall. Oh, rack me not to such a vast extent. Those distances belong to thee. The world's too little for thy tent, a grave too big for me. Wilt thou meet arms with man that thou dost stretch, a crumb of dust from heaven to hell? Will great God measure with a wretch? Shall he thy stature spell? O let me, when thy roof my soul hath hid, O let me roost and nestle there. Then of a sinner thou art rid, and I of hope and fear. Yet take thy way, for sure thy way is best. Stretch or contract me, thy poor debtor. This is but tuning of my breast to make the music better. Whether I fly with angels, fall with dust, thy hands made both, and I am there. Thy power and love, my love and trust, make one place everywhere. I love that one. This one is not an overtly sexual one. It's just a really tragic poem that I just love. It's a piece of it. We're not going to read the whole thing. He writes about Jesus going to the cross to be, killed. And it's really sad. It's called The Sacrifice. O all ye who pass by, whose eyes and mine to worldly things are sharp, but to me blind, to me whose took eyes that I might you find, was ever grief like mine? Judas, doth thou betray me with a kiss? Canst thou find hell about my lips, and miss of life, just as the gates of life and bliss? Was ever grief like mine? Herod in judgment sits while I do stand, examines me with a censorious hand. I him obey who all things else command. Was ever grief like mine? Pilate a stranger holdeth off, but they, mine own dear people, cry, away, away, with noises confused frightening the day. Was ever grief like mine? And now I am delivered unto death, with each one calls for so with utmost breath, that he before me well nigh suffereth. Was ever grief like mine? O all ye who pass by, behold and see, man stole the fruit, but I must climb the tree of life to all, but only me. Was ever grief like mine? Lo, here I hang, charged with a world of sin, the greater world too, for that came in by words, but this by sorrow I must win. Was ever grief like mine? But, O my God, why leavest thou me, the Son in whom thou dost delight to be? My God, never was grief like mine. Betwixt two thieves I spend my utmost breath, as he that for some robbery suffereth. Alas, what have I stolen from you? Death. Was ever grief like mine? But now I die, now all is finished, my woe, man's weal, and now I bow my head. Only let others say, when I am dead, never was grief like mine. Ouch! God, powerful stuff. Oh, and that's only pieces of it. It's lovely poetry. He writes a lot about his faith, and it's very moving, very, very moving. The last guy we're going to talk about is the most heretical, I guess. 1613 to 1649, we have Richard Crushaw. Very interesting fellow. He starts harshly Puritan during the time of the Reformation, very anti-Catholic. This is during the Civil War in England, and eventually Cromwell is coming in to the college where he has to leave. He's put in exile, leaves for the continent. He ends up converting to Catholicism. He was struggling with illness and poverty. He was really not doing well. He ended up getting a patron who brought him to the Pope, and this was supposed to be his chance to make something new of himself. But what he found in the Pope's court was corruption and more evil, and so he spoke up against it and ended up being sent away from court and died on his way out. There's even theories maybe he was poisoned. I think it's entirely possible that just at that point he'd been through so much and traveled so much, his body couldn't take it anymore. He ended up dying. He was an orphan at 14. His father's friends ended up taking care of him. A lot of his poetry is incredibly physical. He's very focused on the physical suffering of Jesus, the implements that penetrate him, the holes that are in Jesus's body, very focused on his orifices and the things that come in and out of them, what is made to stream from him. He's incredibly visual. Let's read some poems. Let's read some poems. This is from Closet Devotions by Richard Rambis, who writes a lot about how the appreciation of Jesus has often come across as homoerotic. It's very fascinating. Whether I call your wounds eyes or mouths, surely everywhere are mouths, alas, everywhere are eyes. Behold the mouths, O blooming with lips too red. Behold the eyes, all wet with cruel tears. Magdala, you who were accustomed to bring tears and kisses to the sacred foot, take yours in turn from the sacred foot. The foot has its own mouths to give your kisses back. This clearly is the eye by which it returns your tears. Oh, streams of blood from head, sides, hands, and feet. Oh, what rivers rise from the purple fountain. His foot is not strong enough to walk for our safety as it once was, but it swims in its own streams. His hand is held fast, but it gives though held fast. His good right hand gives holy dews and is dissolved into its own gift. O side, O torrent, for what Nile goes forth in greater flood, where it carried headlong by rushing waters. His head drips and drips with thousands and thousands of drops at once. Do you see how the cruel shame reddens his cheeks? The thorns, cruelly watered by this rain, flourish and hope forthwith to change into new roses. Each hair is a slender channel for a tiny rill, a little stream from this Red Sea, as it were. Let's go over. Oh, man. So, let's explain this. This is just an excerpt. I couldn't find the whole poem. He writes an epigram to John, the beloved disciple, who you remember, in tradition, is often interpreted as his gay romantic partner. Crushaw writes to him and says, "Enjoy yourself, hide your head in his majestic bosom, for then it would never wish to be placed on a bed of everlasting roses." Remember that there's a story that says the beloved disciple put his head on Jesus at the Last Supper. So Crashaw's saying, please lean on Jesus, beloved disciple. But he continues to say, enjoy yourself, and while he carries you in his holy bosom thus, oh, it will be enough for me to have been able to ride on his back. Not very subtle there, is he? He's not. He just I can't get over that he just said, the man just said, it's okay, you can suck on Jesus' titties, I will ride his back. Woo, that's something. That's something. But the worst thing, not the worst thing, I guess, is the most heretical thing. Before we finish here, let's talk about, let's see where we found, Avila. Where is Avila? He writes a poem about a woman named, Avila, a saint. I can't find, maybe it wasn't listed in here. It is, about a woman, a hymn to Saint Teresa. Basically, this woman, I think, is having ecstatic visions, but the visions involve explicit sexual ecstasy with angels and Jesus and Mary. And in the vision, she transforms when Mary shows up so that she can, enjoy that to the fullest. This man had a sexual obsession with the God, with his God, You see how these figures who, for reasons, various reasons, are unable to fully sexually express themselves, or there's a piece of that sexuality which is repressed, it bubbles up in religious fervor, because that is a socially acceptable way to express these feelings. Maybe not all of these poems would have been accepted at the time, but they are all published in their time period. None of these are posthumous or what have you, so as controversial as they may have been, they were acceptable because they were about Jesus. You can love Jesus. You can write about these kind of very sexual metaphors with Jesus because you're supposed to love him. Everyone's supposed to love him. So if you are a straight woman that doesn't want to be controlled by a husband, you can express that romantic devotion, that sexual devotion to Jesus. If you are a man who has desires for men that you can't openly express in word, you can express it for Jesus. That's fascinating to me. I love it. Closet Devotions goes into the male side. If you want to read more about saints and women in general, Women in Religion is a source book about Christian women and people that have written about them over the ages. I got a lot of info on the mystics from that. Really fascinating stuff. Next time, I think tomorrow, we're not going to be having an episode. We're going to have something special. I will announce possibly later tonight or in the morning. Next week, I think we're going to go and move forward in our time period. We stopped around Constantine. We're going to kind of talk about the 4th century to maybe like 5th, 6th, 7th. We'll see how far we get. Talk about how things start to move forward as the Catholic Church now exists. What does it do? Where does it go from there? Thanks for watching. Thank you to our members like Daniel and Jeff. Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much for the support. If you like what I do and you want to support it, please consider doing so. We got Jessica here, Sagittarius. Thank you all so much. I think Queen of Madness was here earlier. Thank you all for your support. Links are in the description if you like what I do and you want to support it. If you want to buy my books, follow me on social media, join the Discord. Come on, Bob. Come say hi. Bob, come say goodbye. He's touching my knee. Gently, gently touching. Thinking about it. Considering it. He's considering it. Considering. Come on, Bob. Bob, come on. Join us. Come say goodbye. Hey, Hobbit Potato. Oh. I'm glad folks are enjoying this. I know this is the side of Christianity you don't often see. Because obviously there's Christianity has been around for so long and been a religion of so many people. It is not uniform, no matter how much churches would like you to think it is. Come on, Bob. Come on. Hello. No, Bob, let me hold. Bob, let me hold. He looks so insulted. Hi, buddy. Can you say hi? Just... Goodbye, Bob. Here, how about like, that's my knee. Okay, I'll let you have the knee. There you go. Can you say hello? Ow! Ow! No? Okay, well, we're done. Thanks for watching. Next episode will be Monday. And I will see y'all later. Bye.